So in module 13.4, we're talking about extended group by clauses. We're going to look at the rollup, cube, grouping, and grouping set operators. So recall that we used group by with our aggregate functions to specify some common value of some attribute that we wanted to group our tuples or our rows together based on. So what rollup, cube, grouping, and grouping sets do is just kind of extends the functionality of this group by operation. So when we do a rollup, we get the value of the aggregate function for each individual group, and then one additional tuple that is the output of the aggregate function for the relation or the table as a whole without any grouping at all. So to go back to our pilot example just a little bit, if we were to do select, let's just take a look at what we have here real quick. So recall that each one of our pilots has a state that they're from, right? So we have some from Arizona, some from California, some from Texas. So if we wanted to see how many pilots we had from each state, we could do something like this. So we're going to select pilot state and count of asterisk from pilots. I'll just space this out so it's a little easier to read. Group by this common value of PIL state. Okay, so now you see we have 2 pilots from California, 3 from Texas, 4 from Arizona. If we wanted this to be in descending order, we could say something like order by count DESC, and that gets us in a prettier order here. But what rollup is going to do is tell us not only how many pilots per state, but how many pilots we have overall. So we're going to say group by rollup, and then just kind of a weird thing. I don't know exactly why this is the case, but when we do this, we have to wrap the attribute or attributes in parentheses. And so now the rollup gives us the output of the group by, as well as the fact that we have a total of 9 pilots, irrespective of what state they live in. So we just get a little bit of extra data there. Now, one really interesting thing to be aware of is if we use or specify multiple columns in our rollup operation, the order in which the columns is specified is going to change the output that you get. And it's going to change the order that the tuples come back in, but then also is going to change really kind of the fundamental question that you are asking. Okay, so let's imagine that we wanted to find the average salary, or the sum of salaries. I think average would probably have made more sense in this particular example, but regardless, we're finding the sum of the value of salary for each department, and within the department, breaking that down by gender. Okay, so we have 3 departments: risk and compliance, finance and accounting, and internal audit and financial controls, and 2 genders, female and male. Okay, so we're going to find the sum of salary for each department, and then within the department by gender. So females in risk and compliance make a total of 72,000. Males in risk and compliance make a total of 192,000. This is why I think average would be better, because maybe we have a lot more men working in this department. I don't know. But anyway, it doesn't materially change what we're talking about here. So if we were to just group by department name and gender, we would get these first 2 tuples, right? And these 2 tuples that are female and male within finance and accounting, and these 2 that are female and male within internal audit and financial controls. But what the rollup gives us is the sum of salaries for this department regardless of gender, right? So rollup has added department regardless of gender, department regardless of gender, department regardless of gender, and the sum of salaries regardless of gender and regardless of department. Now, if we specified this roll up in the other direction, if we rolled up by gender and then department name within gender, notice that we get the results back in a different order, right? Instead of being grouped first by department and then by gender, we're now grouped first by gender and then by department within gender. And so we see females in each one of these departments, and then the roll up for females overall, regardless of department, and then males for each department, and the roll up for males overall, regardless of department, and then the sum of salaries regardless of department and regardless of gender. So note that what we got different in this second query is we got gender regardless of department, whereas previously we got department regardless of gender. Okay, so these are two very different questions, although they look very similar at a first glance, right? And a lot of the data we got back is exactly the same. It's just a difference of rolling up department or gender within department versus department within gender. Okay, so you have to be very careful if we're using multiple columns within our roll-up operation. And then kind of the best of both worlds, if we want absolutely everything, instead of roll-up, we can use this operator cube. Okay, so cube is going to give us everything that group by does, and then everything that roll-up does in either direction. So when we're using the cube operator, the order in which we specify the attributes is going to change the order that they are returned in the output, but we're going to get all possible combinations of gender within department, gender regardless of department, and department regardless of gender. Okay, so this is just different kind of amounts of data that we can get back from the DBMS depending on what type of business problem we are trying to answer. Now, one kind of nice thing, and this is kind of similar to the level pseudo column that we saw when we were looking at the hierarchical functions, but Oracle creates this, or if you use this grouping function on the attribute that you are rolling up by, Oracle will tell you if a particular row was generated by data out of the database, or I'm sorry, generated by the group by or generated by the rollup. Okay, and then based on that, you could use your decode function to perhaps pretty up your report a little bit. So in this case, or this example that we just had here, if we were to say, let's say, grouping PIL state, we get a value of 1 for this row that was generated because of the rollup, whereas we get 0 for all of these that were generated by by just the regular group by. Okay, so what we could do is to say something like select and then use our decode function. And if the value of this is 1, then we'll call this, total pilots. And if not, we'll just have the name of the state. Right? And so this just gives us, I'll give this an alias as a pilot count, something like that. Make that just look a little bit prettier. So now our group by returned these 3 rows that Arizona has 4, California has 2, and Texas has 3. And then our roll-up generated this value of, the sum of all of this is 9. And then we just pretty this up by using our decode and say if the output of this grouping operation gives us a value of 1, then put the value of total pilots there, else put the value of this attribute PIL state. All right, and if we mess this up and we put a 0 here, we get something really ugly and gnarly like this, right? So experiment with this, you know, see if you can guess what's going to happen when you make a little change like that. But yeah, this is the output that we would expect and hope for. And then kind of the final thing here, so I don't have an example in Oracle, so I'm just going to pull back over to here, is grouping sets. And so whereas cube gave us every possible combination, what grouping sets does is gives us all of the possible combinations except for what would normally be returned by the group by. Okay, so we get, you know, the if we do this group by grouping sets gender within department name, we're going to get the sum of salaries for gender and the sum of salaries for department, but not the sum of salaries for department within gender or gender within department. Okay, so again, no right or wrong set of things that we should be doing here. It just depends on what kind of question you're trying to answer. So this is a lot of different approaches to kind of modifying our group by to kind of pick apart some additional data.